Good afternoon in New York and the Americas. Good evening in Israel, Europe, and Africa. And welcome whatever time of day or night for all who are joining us from all corners of the world. I'm Yael Danieli, founder and executive director of the International Center for the Study, Prevention, and Treatment of Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma, ICMGLT for short. I'm very moved that you joined us today at such difficult times for Israel and for the Jewish people. So thank you for joining our webinar today. This International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma webinar is poignantly held during the Yamim Noraim, or Days of Awe. These are the 10 days of the high holidays between Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, when Jewish people perform cheshbon nefesh, or accounting of their soul, before God and before their fellow human beings. As expressed in the title of today's webinar, the pregnancy I refer to has to do with the multi-generational reckoning of millions of Israelis for over 8 months in response to the current Israeli government attempts to destroy Israel democracy as they have known it since its birth. To help our own reckoning with this painful reality, we are grateful and honored to have with us Professor Moshe Shner, who will present An Orphaned People. This is the book in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it says, Bereshit Hayta HaShoah, or at the beginning, there was the Holocaust. Moshe will present An Orphaned People and reflect on the Jewish people after the Holocaust and its relevance to the current crisis in Israel. Your moderator, I am a clinical psychologist, victimologist, traumatologist, and psychohistorian. I devoted much of my career to studying, treating, and preventing multi-generational impacts of the Shoah or the Holocaust and other massive trauma, also to victims' rights, to rights of future generations, and to reparative justice. My version of history, psychohistory, is related as it is dedicated to exploring, understanding, and articulating history as it is lived, rather than as it is written about in dates and events only. Moshe Shner, our distinguished speaker, is a history professor emeritus at Oranim College in Israel. His academic research and teaching include topics in history of ideas in modernity, Jewish philosophy, Holocaust education, interfaith dialogue in a post-Holocaust world. His 2 recent books are, as I pointed out before, in the beginning, there was the Holocaust, which were published in 2013 in Hebrew and is being translated to English, and Korczak and Katzenelson, 2 educators in the abyss of history, which was published in 2021. Moshe was born to founders of the Ghetto Fighters Kibbutz, or Lohamei HaGetaot, and its Ghetto Fighters House, the Holocaust and Heroism Museum. Moshe is a member of Lohamei HaGetaot, the Ghetto Fighters Kibbutz. We have about an hour and a half for the webinar. Professor Shner will speak for about 40 minutes. Following an interchange among us, I will open the floor to questions or brief comments from the virtual audience, you. Moshe will then conclude with last words. Please use the chat function, and we'll do our best to respond to as many as we can. Feel free to direct your question to a particular, to Moshe or me, or both. Dear Moshe, the screen is yours. Shalom.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yael. Shalom to everyone from Lohamei HaGetaot, the Ghetto Fighters Kibbutz in Israel. I'm honored and pleased to share my thoughts, ideas with you today, tonight in Israel, other times, wherever you are. I hope to see your faces. I don't know why we don't see each other, but I hope that you will be able to understand my Israeli English. So let's start that the horrors of the Second World War and the Holocaust of the Jewish people happened about 80 years ago. Yet they still grasp our souls and do not give us rest. And still more and more people in the world deal with the memory of the Holocaust. They challenge the events of the Holocaust, challenge the imagination, feelings, and thoughts of every person who is conscious of human history. For the Jews, studying the Holocaust is also an in-depth exploration of our most intimate identity. The Jews stand at the forefront of efforts to rebuild the destroyed Jewish world. For the Jews, as for every genocide victim, the past is an ever-present memory. The past is still with us. My hypothesis, which I want to discuss with you today, is that post-Holocaust reality of the Jewish people put an end to Jewish history and Jewish identity as we knew it, and started a new era that we still have to understand and to grasp. I may add that the current troubling situation in Israel, and I'm part of the protesting movement, is deeply connected to this post-traumatic identity of Jews in general and Israelis in particular. So I will start with my personal story. For me, as for many, the Holocaust is an intimate family matter. My late parents, Tzvi Shner and Sarah Neshamit Shner, both Holocaust survivors, were among, as Yael said, among the founders of the Ghetto Fighters Kibbutz, Kibbutz Lohamei HaGetaot in Hebrew, and also the Ghetto Fighters House, Holocaust and Heroism Museum, that happened to be the first Holocaust museum in the world. The founding day of the kibbutz, April 19th, 1949, was also the birthday of the Israeli Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust and Heroism Commemoration Day, and the first public commemoration of the Holocaust. A tradition of public commemoration events was gradually formed at the Ghetto Fighters House amphitheater. Jewish time has opened by a chutzpah of small group of beggars after 2,000 years and accepted a new holiday. Yom HaShoah, that about 4 or 5 years later was accepted by the State of Israel. The kibbutz and my parents' tiny apartment were the gathering places for individuals who dedicated their time to the holy work of documentation and education. Following the vision of Antek Zuckerman, one of the leaders of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, survivors, underground comrades, partisans, writers, scholars, and educators created a culture of historical memory, humanism, and commitment to life, cultivating a society of knowledge, human solidarity, and peace, devoid of any trace of religious messianism. And we'll return to it later on. So, since the first year of the kibbutz members commemorated the national loss through the unique work of the Ghetto Fighters Museum. Their personal stories were silent. They felt that they cannot touch it. But in 1984, they found the courage to publish their personal stories. The 4 volumes of testimonies, in Hebrew, Dapei Edut, tell the life stories of 96 founding members of the kibbutz, lonely survivors of their families and communities, their childhood years, their unbelievable struggle for life and survival during the war, and eventually their way to the founding group of the kibbutz in 1946. 35 years passed until they found the strength to look into the abyss of their own memories and tell their own stories. This was the first time that we, the second generation, learned that our parents had a childhood that did not come from another planet. These 4 volumes, I see them as the Jewish scriptures of the 20th century. 4 years later, they bravely made another step and inaugurated a memorial monument for their relatives, bearing hundreds of names of parents, grandparents, sisters, and brothers, double the number of the kibbutz members. The names on these 8 huge stones are the names of us, the second generation of the kibbutz, a living community that bears the memory of a whole murdered community. And I realized it only in 1988, when we saw the names on the stones. Moshe there, Moshe here. Rachel there, Rachel here. Tzvi there, Tzvika in Israel, etc. My parents' testimonies are there as well. Like so many other family stories, they tell us the true meaning of the Holocaust. It is not Nazism, but the unimaginable loss of life, culture, and human talents. When my parents arrived in Israel in 1948, they were not young. They had nothing with them, beggars, but they had a sense of orphanhood and hope for a new life in an old, new homeland. I never understood how someone can have a second life. My father was born in Lodz to a poor tailor. His mother, Golda Shner, was the youngest among 15 brothers and sisters, all married with children. My father's dozens of cousins, except for one aunt and one of my father's sisters who immigrated to Palestine before the war. This whole tribe was lost, vanished, and we don't know when and where. Hundreds of family members and friends whom I never met and my father never spoke about. The story of my parents is the story of hundreds of thousands of Jews from Europe, whose worlds were destroyed. Millions of people, thousands of communities, oceans of human creativity, all became a legend, a vague reality. As you may know, the Holocaust had hit the most populated centers of Jewish life. In the 20th century, because of a long historical process, which I will not discuss now, the Jewish people was mostly European. It is part of what we are struggling with today in Israel. Just for example, in 48, the number of Jews in Morocco were about 230,000. Only in Warsaw, in 39, there were about 300,000 Jews, only in one city. So for centuries, the Spanish Jewry was indeed a source of spiritual inspiration and leadership for the Jewish people. However, in the last centuries, its influence gradually weakened. The European nations took the lead of modern history from the Islamic countries. Why? It's another lecture. And the European Jews advanced with it. The Europeanization of the Jews accelerated in the 19th century, when through internal growth, like in my grandmother's family, the size of the European diaspora grew significantly, even if millions immigrated to America. By the late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, about 80% of the Jews in the world lived in Europe, between Berlin in the west, Moscow in the east, Salonika in the south, and Vilnius and Riga at the north. It's not something that I evaluate this community or that communities, but here we find the furnace of Jewish national culture and identity. In this milieu, we see all the abundant facets of Jewish life: literature, art, philosophy, science, socialism, Zionism, Hasidism. The number of Jewish writers, schools, newspapers, theaters, political parties, sport clubs, and other institutions of Jewish creativity was beyond what we know in the Jewish world today. We can compare Jewish Vilnius to Tel Aviv today. Only after the Holocaust, the mass destruction and the immigration of more than 5 million Jews to America and Israel, and after the collapse of Jewish civilization in the Islamic world, Jewish demography and geography changed entirely. That world, vital and full of potential for Jewish renewal, was destroyed. Of approximately 8.3 or 0.5, depends how you count, European Jews, only some 2.4 million survived. The centers of Jewish life were shattered. Even if not all European Jews were murdered, the European Jewish communities, many hundreds of years old, some with roots extending thousands of years, ceased to exist. In those lands that constitute the foundation of national Jewish culture, the loss of the Jewish population was particularly severe. In Poland, with 3.2 or 0.3 million Jews, about 87%, some say 89% of the Jews were murdered. In Lithuania and Latvia, about 86%. In Greece, is one of the most ancient Jewish community in the world, more than 2,000 years of Jewish life. In Salonika, about 80% were murdered. In Czechoslovakia, 76%. In former Yugoslavia, 73%. The Netherlands, with the legend that the Dutch people was supporting the Jews, 70%. were murdered. The former Soviet Union, 70% of the Jews were murdered. In Hungary, 50%. In Romania, approximately 50% of the Jews were murdered, but this time by the hands of their fellow Romanians, not by the Germans. I want to focus on two centers that are meaningful to our present reality. In Lithuania and Latvia, over 80% of the children attended before the war Hebrew or Jewish schools. The idea that Jewishness is culture, Tarbut Yehudit, not only religion, lost its most prolific milieu. How many poets like Leah Goldberg from Kaunas we had lost there? We don't know. And the destruction of the German Jewry was also the destruction of the core and living source of liberal Judaism, which celebrated about 2 centuries of an intimate tango with European Enlightenment, liberalism, and democracy. In Israel, liberal Judaism is hardly known today. Luckily, not all European Jews were killed, but European Jewish civilization could not overcome its destruction. Communities that lost 80 or 70% of their people and mass physical destruction could not revive after the Holocaust. The Holocaust halted the flow of Zionist cultural and national creative forces. Along with the destruction of Eastern European Jews came the extinction of the Yiddish language and the rich culture it presented. The Ladino language and culture were also wiped away with the destruction of the Jewish communities around the Mediterranean. The devastation also visited that part of the Jewish world that did not fall, luckily, under German occupation. Political circumstances after the war, and even more so after the establishment of the State of Israel, led to the eclipse of centers of Jewish life throughout the Mediterranean basin, Iran, Iraq, Yemen, North Africa. Arabic and Iranian Jewry consisted of the oldest parts of the Jewish world, more than 2,600 years. All these centers ended shortly after the end of the war and the establishment of Israel. The Arabic Jews were not murdered, but the centers of Jewish life ceased to exist. Summing up these historical facts, the overall picture was of a new Jewish geography, demography, and culture. A new Jewish history has begun with a new historical experience. Before the war, the Jewish people was mainly European. Many Jewish communities were deeply rooted in their countries. Some were even older than the dominant local population. Jews came to Prague before the Czechs. The Jewish communities in the many Islamic countries sent their historical roots, as I told you, about 2,600 years of old. This world collapsed in a short historical time. No other people in the world went through such a catastrophe. The ancient centers of Jewish life were destroyed, and the 3 main Jewish civilizations, the Yiddish, the Ladino, and the Judeo-Arabic, disappeared from the world's cultural map. Besides some centers of ultra-Orthodox Jews in Borough Park, New York, or in Mea Shearim in Jerusalem. The centers of Jewish secularism and Judaism as culture and the milieu of liberal Judaism were lost. The total destruction intensified the sense of loss and orphanhood. It also led to a bitter shattering of the hopes that an alternative home for Jewish tradition could be found in Europe. My parents and their friends understood after the war that Europe is not their home anymore. When my mother died, I found in her room a song, a poem that she wrote about my Europe betrayed me. This was the name of the poem. Most of the Jews today are refugees or newcomers in their place. With any group I see together and I ask, who is more than fourth generation in his own place? Very, very few raise their hand. I don't know who you are. It is physically and demographically a battered, rootless people. Meanwhile, the state of Israel was established. In terms of national history, this is a colossal achievement, which includes the revival of the Hebrew language and national culture, and kibbutz galuyot, the gathering of many diaspora Jews. The new Jewish communities in North America and Western Europe have prospered and achieved an unprecedented economic and social success. Yet, this promising situation must contend with a deep void of the Jewish past. It has been lost, but it also presents through the very fact of its absence. The human reservoir that Zionist ideology had considered when drawing up the blueprints of its future enterprise no longer exists. The human reservoir was now, in Europe, was empty. To summarize the above, the post-Holocaust Jewish people is a new people, carrying dark memories of recent history and vague, fragmented memories of its long history. Jewish identity is new. Its content is still to be created. With the collapse of the old Jewish world, all Jewish history also ended. What will be now is uncertain. With caution, I dare to draw with you the outlines of the new reality of the Jewish people. First, young Jewish world. Today, the oldest significant Jewish civilization in the world is only about 370 years old. In the New World, in America, it is a new culture. The three old cultural civilizations, as we said, the Yiddish, the Ladino, and the Judeo-Arabic, have vanished in a very few years. I don't speak Yiddish. I speak Hebrew and a little bit English. A new geographical orientation. The Jewish people is no more a European people or a North African people. The Jewish people became a people of mainly two centers, as here in our conversation, Israel and America. It's a totally new reality in Jewish history. A people of newcomers, survivors, refugees, and immigrants who are looking for a new home. This is a very important element in the current situation of Israel, because this is a society mainly of newcomers. And also painful memories and basic mistrust. The loss of basic trust in the world, mistrust of other people. Victims of genocide always experience such a feeling. Skepticism and suspicion of ideologies, wars, and faith and morality. In my generation, we refuse to listen to what we call big words. We didn't trust it. The chain of tradition is broken. The old Jewish worlds were destroyed, and the present generations have very little access to their richness. I hardly know the life of my grandparents. I never met them. Jews have an unsolved difficulty in agreeing upon common way of life. rituals, texts, values, and even language, the Jewish world is devoid of a uniting, ordering principle. It is also crucial to the current situation in Israel. Israel is the largest Jewish community now. Besides the American Jewry, we are competing about the numbers. Israeli Jewry, however, is the only growing Jewry in the world. It has very important conclusions. We are an endangered species, like pandas. Despite the population growth in Israel, the Jewish people in general is not growing. The number of Jews today in the world are only a little bit more than the number of Jews in 1939. Large part of the Israeli Jews is from traditional communities in the Arabic countries, not from Europe. It is a new reality with important meaning to the crisis in Israel today. Many Israelis came from non-democratic societies, like the former Soviet Union. It's also important. And we are a dispersed nation. From a people who lived mainly in a national European milieu, the Jews are scattered today all over the world. Once I gave my students a mission to find a country without a Jewish community. They failed. Maybe North Korea. The process of assimilation and loss of identity became much more significant. And the Jewish state, of course, but for the first time in thousands of years, we have a Jewish state. So what is the influence of the Jewish crisis on Israel? The French historian and philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville claimed, in reference to American society, that events which happened in the childhood years of a nation, like in the childhood years of an individual, affect the nation's historical development for generations. Probably this is the case also with Israeli society. It is possible to say that the social and political bewilderment of the Israeli society is part of the tsunami waves which follow the immense earthquake that the Jewish people went through in the 20th century. Destruction that left behind a stricken and shocked people. After the Holocaust, the Jews do not have an ordered and meaningful cosmos, but only broken vessels and vague memories. The known world of old destroyed, and the broken world of today, and the relations between them largely determine the cultural conflict that occupy Israeli society. As Gershom Scholem, one of the most important modern scholars of Jewish philosophy, suggested, the Holocaust must have an impact on Jewish identity. I quote, "The shock suffered because of the Holocaust by every Jew who was conscious of his identity, and by many Jews who were not, has affected all the centers of Jewish life. How deeply they were affected is not yet fathomable. However, we may assume that after effects, repercussions, and reverberations of this event provide the background for and are operative in everything that's happening now." End of quote. And I think he's right. We can identify a few core issues that shape the Jewish post-traumatic world. First, the connection between current history and divine providence and faith. It is a fundamental question. Is God also responsible for this chapter in the history of the Jews? What is the meaning of the statement of faith, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, the protector of Israel will never fail its people? After the horrors of Auschwitz, How can one reconcile the fact of the death camps and divine justice? Can we accept the Messiah after he put off his arrival, even while millions of Jews were murdered? Only a week ago, there was a political scandal in Israel after one of the Knesset members said that God was absent during the Holocaust. Just a week ago. Huge scandal. How can you say something like that? How can we raise children after the Holocaust? The fate of the murdered Jewish children was sealed by their grandparents, who decide to raise their children, the children's parents, as Jews. Today, when Jews choose to bring children into the world and give them Jewish identity, they are aware of the remote possibility that under certain conditions, a second Auschwitz could happen because it was already happened. I remember the first time I took my tiny first daughter to measure a gas mask because of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And she asked me, why someone want to do that to me? And what could I say to a 3-year-old girl? But I knew, because she was Jewish and Israeli. How do Jews view their status vis-a-vis the Gentile nations? Those who massacred and slaughtered, and those who remained and sat idly by. The non-Jew stood at his window and watched silently as his Jewish neighbor, sometimes his business partner, was led to the deportation vehicle. The post-20th century Jew has about 6 million reasons not to trust any person or group. Nevertheless, this negative emotion is nihilistic. It expresses despair of the world and one's fellow man. How can we create a society without mutual trust? How can a Jew put his trust in human progress, in modernity, after the modern world permitted the German death machinery to operate? Cultural detachment. The Jewish people, whose identity was essentially a multi-generational consciousness based on a story passed from generation to generation, from teacher to student, from fathers to sons, is now a people of displaced, ruthless refugees and immigrants. What a mutual cultural discourse a Hebrew-speaking young Israeli who serves in the army and arrives to the party on Shabbat evening can develop with his grandparents who were there and are no longer alive. Even if he met them, what could he say to these traditionally observant Yiddish or Ladino or Arabic-speaking grandparents who always dream of the land of Israel but cannot tell the differences between flowers and birds and places in Israel? How do we bridge the layer of ashes that divide between the sages of Lublin Yeshiva and an art school in Tel Aviv? I try to imagine what I could say if I could visit my grandparents in Lodz. What we have in common? Culturally, nearly nothing. The major paradigm of the old Jewish world was shattered. Jews do not agree today of anything. Religious law, ethics, common language, common text. What is our common text? You in America, and us in Israel, and the future of the Jewish people. And we do not agree even to disagree. Beneath lies an abyss of destroyed world. A creepy sense of despair threatens to crash down the Jewish wheel of life. We know that persons who suffered a great loss sometimes break down years later. Yael knows it better than me. traumatized communities sometimes collapse decades after the traumatic event. Maybe Israeli Jewish civilization might collapse into its historical abyss in its 8th decade.
Moshe, might I ask you a question? One of our participants, Peter Domant, said he heard this important phrase, but missed the last key word when you said the Jewish world is devoid of a uniting. Would you say it again, please? People are very attentive. So,
yeah. As we try to understand, now it's on the front in Israel, but I wrote these ideas 20 and 10 years ago. What is common to all Jews in the world, beside a sense of orphanhood? We speak different languages. I break my teeth now with English. And you don't speak Hebrew, maybe. What are common texts? Most of us do not read the Bible regularly. Jews always struggle about rituals, about their religious life. As the joke says, a Jew must have at least 2 synagogues, one to join and one never to join. And so we disagree nearly on everything. And in Israel, the current question today is what makes us one people besides common enemies outside Israel. And the different people give different answers to this crucial question. To silence despair, Israeli society until now embraced itself with hectic activity. On the other hand, we face the hysteria of Jewish rabbinism and Jewish messianism. It's also part of these efforts to avoid the abyss of history. If we shout, we don't hear the silence of the abyss. If we shout, we don't look down, like in the cartoons, when the cat is running and until he looks down, he's not falling. So the hysteria of rabbinism and Jewish messianism, the unavoidable clash between immigrants from Europe and the Arabic countries, that adds also to this bewilderment. So I will conclude my words with the identification of 3 frontiers, or 3 major dividing lines in Israeli society today. And this is the map of disagreement among us. We say the protest is against the current steps of the Israeli government and focus on the Benjamin Netanyahu, his efforts to remain at any cost in his power position and escape his criminal charges. Netanyahu, of course, can stop the crisis, but only for a while. It is bigger than him. Like other populist leaders in history, he rides the tiger of the deep currents of social hostilities. He did not create those social clashes, but he is using them to gain political power. What we call the Bibism, after the name Bibi, is not going to disappear even when Netanyahu will step down as prime minister. I'm sorry to say that, but this is the reality. We can identify 3 sources of unrest in the Israeli milieu that arise from our above analysis. The first is the dividing line between rabbinic Judaism and secular national Judaism. Zionism was never a harmonious continuation of the Jewish traditional identity based on Torah and halachic way of life. From its very beginning, Zionism was a secular national enterprise, and Jewish orthodoxy saw it as a rebellion against divine providence. Orthodox circles refused all the time to legitimate Zionism and the earthly state of Israel. I have with me, I don't know if I can show it to you, a letter from 1900 from Herzl to my grandfather, Avraham Glicksman.
Tell people who Herzl was.
Herzl, the founding father of Zionism. And in 1900, he wrote a letter, a response to a letter from my grandfather in Lodz, ensuring him that the Zionist movement would respect religious pluralism and conservative Judaism. So the issue was there. This principal conflict led Ben-Gurion to accept the known status quo. We put religious issues aside, and it led the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, to avoid the task of forming a constitution, because they wanted to keep all parts of the Jewish people together. It was never solved. And when the Haredi communities grew and gained political power in recent years, they challenged the essence of Israel as a democratic modern state. But this time, without ethical sublimations and without political limitations, which the Jews accepted in Gentile countries through history, the Dina de Malchuta Dina principle. We respect the law of the host country. Opportunistically, they became the political allies of Netanyahu. The second front exists between the Messianic Judaism and earthly Zionism. In recent centuries, the physical and symbolic ghetto walls have collapsed, and traditional Jewish world of bearers of God was profoundly changed. The Messianic vision lost its monopoly in the Jewish mind, and the needs of the present got their place as well. The Jewish world became a schizophrenic world, a schizophrenia that we still experienced very strongly today, as the traditional Jewish identity of a holy community resides side by side with the surrounding mundane reality. After the 20th century, the chasm in Jewish identity became an abyss, as Jews' old messianic inspirations faced a new urgent need for a secure asylum and basic everyday needs. For most of the European Jewish remnants, Messianism was a luxury. After the utter destruction, the survivors felt more than anything the demands of life, the simple wish to have a family, raise children, and find peace. It was not the Messiah that traveled their consciousness. It was the sandwich he or she wanted to make for his or her children when they went to school in the morning. When I think about my mother, hidden in a frozen swamp, in a partisan unit in the Belarusian forest, the last thing she had in mind was messianic ethics. Her most imagined could reach was a home, a secure. Nonetheless, in accord with rabbinic Judaism, Jewish messianism is still alive. For many Jews, earthly everyday life was not meaningful enough to support Jewish identity. It's boring for them. History betrayed them. They needed another anchor and chose messianism. Jewish hopes of eschatological redemption lived in the heart of Jews. Still, over the centuries, political circumstances kept it locked within the recess of esoteric literature and the walls of the Beit Midrash. The renewal of the Jewish statehood led to the release of the messianic energies from the boundaries of utopian discourse. The gene was released from the jar, and no one can return it into it. Zionism awakened a deep and sensitive chord within the Jewish mind. The hope for establishing a heavenly kingdom on earth and realigning the promising long-awaited chapter in the rabbinic narrative is here again. This is the Jewish schizophrenia between the vision of eternity and secular Israel. In this split between two different narratives, the old mythic one and the young Zionist one, lie the roots of the political conflict that does not give rest to Israeli society, and not only for the last 9 months. Jewish messianism exploded in a huge flame after the 6 Days War and the return to the ancient mythic territories, the territories of the Bible. In the minds of many, Israel was no more just a dull, mundane enterprise, but the first step toward the return of the divine kingdom upon earth. Jewish settlements in the West Bank got a divine aura. Democracy cannot realize messianic hopes, but messianism is one of the main driving forces of Netanyahu's coalition. Coalition members openly speaking about annexing all the occupied territories of 67 and forming a halachic fundamentalist state instead of what they say a colorless, uninteresting, modern and secular state. It is not a Jewish state in their mind. Israel is facing the crossroad of democracy versus fundamentalist nationalism. It is a historical moment for us. The third divide line, which fuels the current Israeli conflict, is the social and cultural clashes between Jews of European origins, the Ashkenazi Israelis, and the Jews from Arabic origins, the Mizrahi Israelis. The conflict between people of the north and immigrants from the south exists in any westernized country that encounters waves of immigrants. Look what happened in France in the last few weeks. The cultural gap causes unavoidable conflicts, sometimes violent. Israel is no exception, a country of immigrants from non-liberal and non-democratic, modernized societies. When Mizrahi Jews arrived in Israel, they faced similar hardships, discrimination, and feeling of inferiority. Many carry these bad memories to the third and fourth generation. For them, the Netanyahu coalition is an opportunity to rise and avenge their grandparents' humiliation. They say it clearly. Many of these Mizrahi Jews came from traditional families. Facing modern Israel, they found their dignity in religious circles. Their religiosity was their answer to the secularity of the Ashkenazi Israel. For them, it was natural to join Netanyahu's nationalistic coalition as well. So we have the Torah Judaism, the Messianic Judaism, and the Mizrahi Judaism. But what next? My age is disturbing me. Even if we understand the ground of the Israeli bewilderment, we still must overcome it and foster the democratic and modern identity of Israel. Messianism was a curse throughout Jewish history. In modern history, nations that try to reverse history to an imagined glorious past, like Italy, Greece, Serbia, Iraq, Germany, ended with rivers of blood. You cannot reverse history. Today, the Ukrainians suffer from the Russian dreams of past imperialistic glory. fueled by the Russian church. The Torah paradigm was sufficient for ghetto life, for them, not for a democratic state. The Zionist revolution of Jewish identity, we now understand it's not finished yet. As Aaron David Gordon, one of the leaders of Israeli Zionism, said, it was easy to take the Jews outside exile, but it is difficult to take exiled outside of their mind. But we have no choice. If Israel wants to survive, it must secure its Herzlian DNA as a modern, pluralistic, democratic state. And it is a huge struggle, a cultural civil war. And we need your support and your help in these days, in this struggle. We will not be able to win it alone. This is it. Thank you very much.
Wow.
Yael, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Moshe. As even before I met you, you always, your writings managed to bring tears to my eyes, and a sense of commonality of understanding, which is so dear, particularly in times of strife. You remember our first conversation when I told you that what made me cry in your writings was your analysis that after the Shoah, or the Holocaust, we, the Jewish people, are simply in a state of orphanhood. And that was so much what I have believed for so many years. It was a moment of feeling together in a tough world of lack of togetherness. And you remember in that conversation that I too believe that it was an issue of identity. And the center believes it's an issue of identity healing. And even the awards we give are called the Repair Awards. And we believe that the second generation, which you are, views itself as having to repair the world for their parents and for themselves. And you are so much the realization of that. So I feel humbled by your amazingly comprehensive overview and the philosophical conclusions. We do have several, there's one thing I would like from you, if it's easily accessible. Can you locate your mother's poem and read it to us?
I will try. I will try. I don't know if it's possible.
But because you see the sense of betrayal by the country that you consider yourself a part of is happening to her children and grandchildren now in the country that she helped and your father helped to build. You spoke about suspiciousness, but it's really not only a deep sense of orphanhood, but also a deep sense of betrayal by humanity or by the people who are in authority that we trust to, I don't even want to say to take care of us, although that's probably how it is psychologically, but to do their job so at least they don't destroy us or abuse us.
I have the point.
If you can find it, I would be so grateful. And
I have
also, it would be fantastic for our audience today and for future audiences, if you could share with us the written copy of your lecture, so people can also read it at their time, if that's okay with you.
You want me to show the poem?
Huh?
You want me to show my mother's poem?
Well, of course, it's in Hebrew. It's not in English, huh? Is it very long?
No, but I will just read a few words of it.
I would love to see it anyhow between us, even if we can't do any, we can't honor it at this website, at this webinar. I would love to know what she sees, what she experiences as the betrayal. Oh my God, here it is. I don't know. I think there are very few Hebrew readers in our audience today.
Okay, so my Europe, don't cry. Your mountain.
Oh, my Europe, don't cry. You're.
לא אזכור מיד בחום, כי גורשתי לתהום, לבכות ולהספיד את מתייך.
Wow.
I expelled to the abyss to cry over your dead people. כי ראיתי את כל שטנייך, all your satans, רוקדים במגפי מסמרים, dance with military boots, on the head of babies and old people. לא ימחקו צלילי במותייך. The sounds will not go away. אוי אירופה שלי, מכל עמלי, את טרפת את תמולי, את my yesterday, ואני רק אדם שבר כלי. So, if people want
please send it to me. I would like, maybe we can write something about it together, because with all of the crimes she expresses, she has pity for Europe.
Yeah.
For her destroyer. It is
a European person before the war, and she cherished European culture. And she remembered her Latin lessons and could quote until the age of 90 poems, Lithuanian poems, poetry. So both she and my father were Europeans before they came to Europe. But Europe betrayed them. So their childhood years was something that they have internal conflict with.
It's the wounded identity. Yeah. And when you give the three elements, each one of them is which part of the identity, all of the elements of the wounding of which part of the identity. Yeah, there's so much more to understand. The audience is very Robbie, can you put perhaps Enid first, out of honor for she's older than me, so Enid, please be Robbie, put Enid first, then Barbara, Rabbi?
Yep, they're all in.
Okay. Enid, would you like to take the floor for briefly?
Yes, thank you,
Shana
Yael.
tova, Shana tova, my dear friend.
Shana Tova, my dear. Having lived in Jerusalem during the Yom Kippur War and been back many times since, and both as a lawyer and somebody that's involved in international human rights, I always felt that Israel could destroy each other or destroy itself from within. I think this is some of what you were saying. How can this be overcome? Can it be overcome? Because this is my biggest fear. Thank you.
And Barbara, yeah, do you want to respond to that, Moshe, or would you rather take several questions?
I am a member of one of the protesting movements
Okay.
called the Civic Democratic Movement. And we try to, like many others, to stop this crazy government, crazy coalition. But as I say to you and to my friends, even after this government will fall down, we will have a lot of work to deal with the three divide lines that I spoke about. We have to recreate Israel. It's like a new independence war that we are going through now.
That's why I asked you to explain who Herzl was, because for those who don't know, still don't know, he's the one who prophesied the state of Israel. He's the one who said the words that still totally guide my life. If you want, it is not a dream.
Yeah.
If you want, you make it a reality. Barbara, I would wait. I would take some other comments because yours are more global. If it's okay, Dean.
That's fine.
Dean, our board member. He's speaking from Croatia. Enid was in Philadelphia. Dean, please contribute, since your country has gone. At least you're part of your. Okay, you talk, please.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for this really impressive lecture, and it was so moving, I would say, and so insightful. But I would like actually to propose or ask you a comment on regarding something that occurred to me during you were talking, and that is whether the current government in Israel and Prime Minister are actually using these methods to kind of rebrand the Israeli identity and in a way breaking away from the quote unquote old social identity that was proud and so fruitful of achievements in any way. And in that he's counting on increased demographic diversity, as you mentioned, within the country, plus the social threats to the country and the growing non-liberal tendencies in many countries around. So is it about breaking away from what is, as you fantastically presented, the core of the Jewish Israeli identity? Thank you.
Yes, just 4 days ago, in the Supreme Court in Jerusalem, the defending attorney of Netanyahu just defamed the Independence Declaration of Israel. Unbelievably, said it is not important document. The Declaration of Independence, the most important document in Israeli history. And yes, for them, Herzl is a persona non grata, and his vision is not a Jewish vision. But it was in the late 19th century, it was like that. Only now those currents came to the surface. And there are ministers that want rabbinic Judaism. There are ministers like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir that want an apartheid state ruling under the boots of the army millions of Palestinians. Unbelievable. We couldn't dream of it. And there are Mizrahi Jews, not all of them, those who couldn't enjoy the flourishing Israel and left behind. And they just want to destroy everything around. But they learn, they have good teachers. They have Trump in America. They have a Hungarian example. They have Polish example. They have Turkish example. And they want an Arthurian semi-democratic state. And others want a religious fundamentalist state. There are some crazy people, really crazy people, who dream about a new temple in Jerusalem. Unbelievable. But they're serious about it. And the idea of democracy, the culture of democracy, we realize now that it is fragile. It needs support and cultivation all the time. And if you do not cultivate it, it's not going to the following generation, and it's becoming very weak. Most of the Israelis understand democracy as technical issues, not as a culture, not as essential values of enlightenment, of human freedom, of human equality, etc., etc. But of course, you're right that you see it in other countries as well. The Hungarian Prime Minister is a teacher of Netanyahu. Ministers are going there to learn how they did it. So what will happen? We don't know. We really try. Sometimes we desperate about it, but sometimes we are full of hope that if the majority of Israelis will rise up, then these trends will end sometime. Tomorrow or next year. It will take a long time to change the current of Israeli politics.
Well, I want to acknowledge Jack Barth finding your presentation profoundly important. He is a survivor from Holland. I'm trying to acknowledge everybody. You can see, you can look in your own right. Barbara, could you promise a brief comment, please, and then Peter, please. Barbara.
Okay, I think we have a global cultural problem, which is embedded in the belief that growth economics can fix the problems that it causes. And democracy cannot fix that. Because at the moment,
Let me just say, Barbara is in England, Moshe, just so you know how many countries you listen to today. Go ahead, Barbara.
yes, I actually studied at the the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. My mother was Jewish, and she emigrated to Israel. So I have a link to Israel, and I have always been very environmentally conscious. And I decided as a teenager not to have any children. So, but you'd be hard pushed to find an Israeli man who would agree to marry a woman who didn't want children. But anyway, democracy is not going to solve the fact that we actually need to shrink the global economy by about 75% if we want to survive the ecosystem's collapse that we've triggered. I'll put a little link in the chat to a little animation that I've had made recently to explain how we're currently operating at 300% above the carrying capacity of Earth.
And we are planning on having a specific webinar specific to that together. So might I, so please Bara, put it in the chat, also email it to me. And can we give the floor to Peter, please? Very kind, would you let people know where you are actually?
Sure. Okay. I don't know how to turn, oh, here, maybe I can turn my camera live. I think it would be a little more polite if I can find the video switch, but it doesn't seem to be appearing.
It's perfect, please. It's
anyway,
perfect.
Yes, I'm speaking from Berkeley, California. I'm a graduate university in peace and conflict studies. And my background in the 1970s was as a young teacher, but very enthusiastic teacher of the Transcendental Meditation program. In the 1980s, mid-80s, I teamed up with another gentleman, and we founded the original Star Alliance Foundation. And I have continued to develop the vision through a long and winding road of highest civic ideals for all the people of the world that could be declared by all of us as a people worldwide, an inclusive vision. And I take a lot of inspiration, which I just share for a moment, from the human hand, because if you just consider one hand within itself, it's a beautiful model of community where the fingers represent individuality, diversity, and freedom, all three of those. But the freedoms are limited and always tied down to their responsibilities to each other. And this creates reliability and harmony as a team. And so just with vastly greater complexity, the same principle can apply to the human race, but we all have this built-in example in our two hands. And so the idea of the principles being like the bones around which the relationships can be built and maintained, and then declaring those principles in a civic way that can be universal. That's our goal as a Star Alliance. And everyone is invited to be a Star citizen by learning the ideals and committing to them, and then doing their best to practice them. So it could be a uniting force.
That's beautiful, and perhaps we can talk about doing a webinar together in the future.
Beautiful. Yeah, and then politically, I have as a citizen of the world, I really think we have to come to terms with creating a Congress of the Earth that will represent populations proportionately to the whole body of the Earth. And this can be created within the United Nations. People do not realize, but I was coached by an international lawyer years ago, Benton Musselwhite, that Article 109 of the UN Charter has this provision for calling a charter review, also known as, to me, I mean, much more inspiring to think of it as a global constitutional convention.
Mm-hmm. There is actually an initiative yesterday, today, tomorrow, because this is the first week of the General Assembly, which means in New York you cannot move. But there is a very strong initiative to create a new charter. I don't, and we can talk about that and talk about those who are suggesting that. And I'm deeply moved that the Moshe's presentation during the Yamim Noraim, to go back to the beginning of the webinar, inspired not only more knowledge of the Jewish history and the lives of Jewish people, but led people to think about global issues of unity and disunity and democracy and how fragile it is and what needs to be done to gently nurture it and keep on guard for its survival. I know yesterday I attended, I also am a protest person like Moshe, but I do that in New York. Yesterday I attended a meeting with soldiers who chose not to serve dictatorship. I've met with them several times and will continue to do so tonight as well. And because we are a multi-generational center, I am planning with them another webinar of those who chose not to serve, which is such a horribly painful choice to make when you love a country and when you have defended her so loyally from being a baby onward. So we will have a webinar. We're planning a webinar with children or grandchildren of survivors who are part of that unique movement. And tomorrow I'll be protesting across the street from the Metropolitan Opera House because that is where President Biden is hosting all heads of state. And I will be protesting as part of what's called Bonot Alternativa, which in Hebrew means women building an alternative. Actually, the woman who built it, Moran Katzenelson, is receiving our Leadership Repair Award in October. And I adore her. And she's using the handmaidens uniform, the long red gown with the white cap to scream attention to the first victim of what's going on, which is women's rights, girls' rights, etc. Not only in the secular community, including in the religious and Orthodox community. So we will be there, and it's very easy to see red, so they will see us. And of course, it's not, as Barbara and Peter pointed out, this is not only an Israeli issue, it's a global issue. All of these are global issues. I think, Moshe, that's how you started your presentation. But so we will continue, you will be notified. Moshe, I promised everybody your last word. You're allowed 3.
Thank you very much. I have a lot to say, but I don't have the time to say it. Of course, the current Israeli government, as I answer Barbara, is unfriendly to the environment. And even policies pro-environment were ended when this government was formed. But of course, we have to do more. On the other hand, the Jews in the 20th century, the 19th century, were champions of being citizens of the world. And the lesson that they learned, that it is a luxury. You must have a strong home in order to be a citizen of the world. Of course, this is a vision of monotheism from biblical times. One God, one creation, one humanity, one morality. This is the essence of monotheism. Not a hidden God, but one, that we are one, that we are together. But history developed in different course. And of course, we paid a very high price of these dreams of international unity and of being citizens of the world. My father was one of those dreamers. And as you said, I am a scholar of Korczak. And Janusz Korczak, who hoped that all humanity will unite behind the cause of the child. Ended in Treblinka. And all his children went with him to Treblinka death camp. So in this world, it's very easy to be Peter, a citizen of the world, in secure Berkeley. But we need a secure basis to be able to support all the initiatives of all human solidarity. This is a Zionist perspective. We believe that the Jewish state would be the blessing for the entire world. We are very far from it now. And we have responsibility for the environment and for the troubles of other people. But this is the essence of true democracy. Only if you live in a strong and stable democratic state, you can follow universal ideas. Because this was a Jewish dream. If we take Freud, that believed that one psyche will unite the nations. It was Karl Marx, who believed that one economy will unite all the workers in the world. It was the creator of Esperanto, who believed that one language will unite the entire humanity. The science maybe will unite the entire humanity. We found that it is not enough. We need a home. And from there, to try to be part of the family of nations, to be part of the initiatives of the United Nations, to be part of the Paris Declaration for the Rights of Children and the Paris Agreement on Ecology, that Trump left and denied. And Benjamin Netanyahu is his follower, his admirer. So we have a lot of work in front of us. But we are now look at it with open eyes. We awakened from a naive dream that we are in a secure place. No, democracy is something that we have to fight for. Human equality is something that we have to fight for. Human rights and human freedoms is something that we have to fight for. More people in the world live in non-democratic societies until today. It's not natural democracy. It's the invention of humanity. And we have to work on it every day in order to secure it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Shana Tova, which means a good year to all of you, to all of us. Hopefully, we will have peace. And we don't just mean peace between states, but inside states. And we will continue. Thank you so much, Moshe.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Yael.